would have never been able to take my uncoordinated 8-year-old and turn him into a kid who earned a full athletic scholarship, or take my undersized little girl and turn her into a freshman hitting home runs on varsity if I hadn't have been warned about 5 developmental traps that every kid will run into on their journey from Little League to performing at the high school level and beyond. Which brings up the first thing I think people fall for, where what they'll do is they'll see someone like a Shohei Ohtani, or back in my day, a Jeff Bagwell, which are these really big, really powerful guys, and they'll think, hey, my kid should do what those guys are doing at the plate. They're having a ton of success. If I do what they do, I'll have success too. But the problem is big people can get away with things that smaller people can't. So, for example, Jeff Bagwell was a beast, but when he took his stride, he actually strides backwards. Probably not something your 10-year-old should be doing. So copying big body mechanics when you're not a big body is the first trap that we want to make sure that you avoid. So instead, what you actually want to do is copy what we call little bopper mechanics. And when I say little boppers, I mean guys that are under 6 feet tall in the MLB who still hit 25, 30 home runs a year. These are guys that are forced to be more efficient with their bodies in order to still be considered power hitters, and they tend to all do very similar movements that big guys don't necessarily have to do. So, for example, one of those traits, like you see here with Josh Donaldson, is a hand pump. Now, it's not something you have to have. It's not a law, but it is something they tend to use. But if you notice, when my daughter was 12 and only 5 feet tall, she absolutely has a hand pump when she hits her first home run ever here. And it's because we tested and experimented with all the different little bopper power techniques to see which ones would land for the way her body moves best. And it worked really well adapting this one to her swing. Now, there are about 17 other little bopper traits, and we actually made a whole other video breaking down what we think the most important ones are. And I'm going to link to that at the end of this video so that if you want to go deeper on that, you can. But the thing I want you to remember here is that if you're copying the wrong model of hitting and the wrong mechanics that people use, everything you try to build on is going to be off. So once you know what mechanics you need to work on, the next trap people fall into is how to go about trying to fix those mechanics, where most parents and coaches, when they see something wrong, they try to tell the kid what they're doing wrong and then tell them how to do it right with verbal cues like keep your hands back or fire your hips or stay through the ball. That can work, but only for kids with really high body awareness, which is why professional coaches, they actually can use that style with pro athletes and they can get good results because pro athletes have ridiculous levels of body awareness. But when those same coaches come down and try to use that same coaching style on a 9-year-old or a 10, 11-year-old, it almost never transfers as well as it did to the big league because young kids just can't feel what those coaches are describing no matter what kind of pedigree that coach has at the professional level. But the approach that I've noticed has a much higher chance of actually helping kids learn how to fix their mechanics was when they use a style of coaching that I call cueless coaching, where what those kinds of coaches do is they get really, really good at getting the athlete to change their mechanics without using verbal cues, but by instead putting them into environments that change the mechanics without ever having to talk to the kid about them. So here's an example. One of the most important parts of hitting is making sure that you swing at good pitches and that you take bad ones. So this is a trainable skill, and one way that you can train this is through a device like this. It's a big circle net that you throw a ball through, where when the ball is released out of the coach's hand, only pitches that stay inside the V end up being strikes. And if they come out of the V, the hitter quickly starts to understand he needs to take those pitches. And it becomes so obvious after taking BP on these things that there's no cue needed for learning when they need to swing and when they need to take. The environment that we put them in changes their behavior for us. And this type of coaching exists across dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of different mechanical types of skills that we need to be able to coach kids how to do. And if your skills aren't up to snuff, it tends to block the kid's success a lot. Where, for example, I'm not immune to this. My son was stuck at about 83, 84 miles an hour in a game off of the mound for the last 2 years. And he was there because I was really good at teaching the upper body mechanics for how to throw hard. That's why he can throw out a lot of guys at the catcher position and has a very above average arm as a catcher. But I sucked and did not have the skills for how to coach him on how to fire his pelvis and his lower half from the mound in a pitching delivery. So my lack of coaching skills was blocking his progress in that area. But when we got him a pitching coach who did have that skill to unlock the pelvis and his lower half, he used this style of coaching to put my son in weird little positions that let him discover the things that his body needed to feel without cues. And it helped him get up to 90 miles an hour as a senior. But here's where it gets tricky. You can have the best cueless coaching setup in the world, but if your kid's body physically cannot control the movements that you are asking them to do, they are never going to be able to fix their mechanical problems. Because, for example, take a look at my daughter right here, where when she swings, her pelvis is going completely the wrong direction. And it doesn't matter how good of a drill I was going to put her in, or how I tried to coach it, or what I was going to say, or no matter what we tried to fix this, everything we tried failed because her body can't physically control, in this case, her fascial slings, which are the parts of the body that run up one side of the hip and across to the other rib cage. And she couldn't control them well enough during her swing. And so she just kept swinging this way where her hips kept going backwards. It was an unstable part of her system. But if you're thinking, oh, well, she probably just needs more core stability work, like more planks, that would help, right? Why I like where your head's at. The problem with that approach is there have been study after study after study that shows that doing planks in isolation does not actually help athletes create more power. Yes, she did need a more stable core, but planks weren't the answer. Because what studies do say is the answer is doing something like this, where this is a multi-joint movement, where in this movement, we are working on controlling stability in the shoulder as she lands, controlling the fascial sling as she lands on the opposite leg at the same time, and then throwing in a hand-eye coordination element at the same time. And these types of movements where you're training multiple things at a time are proven to increase power in athletes. Because when you come back here and you take a look at my daughter blasting this ball over the left fielder's head, her pelvis still does go backwards and it's not all the way fixed yet, but it's about half as much as it used to be on that first swing, which is a massive improvement, and it ends up launching the ball over this girl's head. So if you're not adding in some sort of motor control exercise to upgrade the area of your kid's body that they are lacking control in, you're going to keep being disappointed with the results from your kids' practices. Now, these first three layers of this pyramid are things you want to make sure get dialed in before puberty hits. But then once puberty does hit, these next two are going to get you if you don't know what to watch for. And what people don't pay attention to is the fact that there are minimum levels of strength a kid needs to get to if they want to realize their full athletic potential. And most people just don't even have any idea what those numbers are or how close or far away their kids are from them. So I'm going to put them up here on the screen here for you so that you can see them for boys and for girls. And feel free to just pause this and write them down so you have that on record. But basically, you take a percentage of your kid's body weight that they should be able to do for a bench press or a squat or a deadlift and reverse lunges. And then those numbers I just shared with you are how much they should be able to lift based off of their body weight in each of those lifts. Plus, there's another one that I like to add to this that has a ton of transfer to hitting, where it's making sure that your kid meets minimum grip strength numbers, where a lot of personal trainers don't ever talk about this, but grip strength is super, super important and has a ton of transfer to baseball and softball hitting world. And what you will find is that as your athlete gets closer and closer to being able to hit these numbers, you're going to see a lot of on-field improvements and success. So for example, my son can hit all the lower half numbers, but his upper body isn't quite there yet. So he's still seeing a lot of gains in his hitting and his pitching as he gets his upper body up to where we can officially look at him and say he's strong. But my daughter at 16, because girls reach physical maturity sooner, has already hit all of her baselines. So when she continued to get stronger, what we notice is that it did not show up on the field with better performance. And that's the trap people don't understand. They think that the weight room will solve everything. But sometimes when we go on a journey, the vehicle that was super successful in getting you most of the way there isn't the vehicle that gets you to your final destination. Which is why once your kid does hit those strength thresholds, it's no longer about how much weight they can lift, it's more about how fast they can lift that weight. And this is the area that some of the world's most elite athletes thrive in. It's like why people like Ken Griffey Jr., when he broke into the league, didn't look like a bodybuilder. But he did know how to produce force in very short windows of time. That's why he was so good. And it's that ability that separates kids who can squat the house but can't hit for power from the kid who looks kind of average but the ball explodes off their bat. But here's the thing you need to pay attention to if you're gonna dive into this level of training, which is to make sure you follow Pearson's law, which states that which is measured improves, but that which is measured and reported improves exponentially. And this is important because there are 5 key speed metrics and force output metrics that we need to be measuring to make sure we're actually helping our kids learn to produce more force and power in short time windows. And if you're not tracking these, you're kind of flying blind and you aren't going to get as good of results as if you were tracking them. So number 1 is the vertical jump. How much force can your athlete produce jumping straight up? And depending on how old your athlete is, these are the ranges you're looking for with boys. And for girls, we want them 15 to 17 in middle school, 17 to 19 in high school, and 19 to 22 in college. The second metric, we want to be able to measure how much force they can produce moving forward. And we like to do this with the triple broad jump. And the formula for tracking this is pretty simple. You take the distance that they can jump and you divide it by their height. And if they do a good job, their ratio is going to be 3.5 times their height. They're doing an okay job if they're 3 to 3.49, and they're kind of driving the struggle bus if they're 3.0 or below. Third, we want to know how much force they can produce laterally, and there aren't any great data sets for publishing what these numbers are, so what we just do personally is we put down a measuring tape and we just track it, and whatever the baseline is, every time we train, we just try to beat it, because if you're getting better and beating your old records, who really cares what everyone else is doing as long as you're making yourself better every single day. Number 4 gets into how fast we can rotate, where we want to be measuring how hard we can throw a medicine ball. I like to use a radar gun, or you can track the distance that we can throw it from a scoop toss position. And then number 5, which is the single best way to train your central nervous system to fire faster, is to use something like a GPS tracker and track your kids' top sprinting speeds in miles per hour, so that every time they run, which should be 2 to 3 days a week, they know if their system is getting faster. So measuring all 5 of these as part of a whole holistic training program absolutely has to be included if you want your kid to reach their full potential. And if you'd like to see a full framework for how all of these layers connect when you're putting together an entire training program for a kid and how to actually diagnose which ones are holding them back, I walk you through that in this whole thing right here in that video. Or if you want to go back to that first layer about the little bopper traits we were talking about, the ones that efficient, smaller hitters all have in common, we break those down in this video right here.